Well, good morning, everybody. Just want to make a quick point and make it clear. When I was contacting Sheriff Herman, when I was emailing him regularly, I even incidentally once got an email back from Mark Wiegert. Amazingly, I didn't realise it, but it was it was the 11th anniversary of the Brendan Dassey March 1st interrogation, but it had nothing of any great importance. In the email, he said that he had 100% confidence in the integrity of the investigation, and that I may wish to check out former prosecutor Ken Kratz's book. Of course, he didn't mention former disgraced and forced to resign attorney. It was the special prosecutor. Well, he is the prize, so I suppose he is special. There's certainly something different about Ken Kratz. So I simply replied that I would not be wasting any money on Ken Kratz's book. But yeah, I just want to make it clear that in all my correspondence with Sheriff Herman, there was something that I mentioned quite a few times, was that if he wanted me to cease writing to him, he need only ask, and he need only say, look, I don't want you to keep writing to me. And as I say, when it came to phoning him, we probably had about a dozen phone conversations. So if there was any feeling that I was harassing Robert Herman, we get one or two people that seem to think that if you've had 12 conversations with the sheriff, you're harassing him. Well, you know, he didn't have to take my phone calls. He didn't have to read the emails. Same with Emily Matesic. Yes, I've sent her a few things, and I've made it clear to her as well that if there's, if she doesn't want me to send stuff to her, you know, she can she can just say, you know, please don't keep sending me this stuff. But what is interesting is if you go onto her Facebook page, just Emily Matesic, excuse me, as mentioned by Emily herself on Facebook, there are one or two bits about making a murderer. Recent stuff, not from the case 15 years ago, but within the last, it was Valentine's Day 2018 that they had the first hearing in Chicago in front of the panel, the 3-judge panel. And of course, famously, Ken Kratz does his press conference to publicise his book. But there is also a bit of an interview. If you go onto Emily's Facebook page, scroll down, you'll get to the interview with a brief interview with Jerry Buting. Again, similar sort of press conference type thing. It's interesting that Emily asks the basic question of, you know, should interrogators, you know, what should they be allowed to do? Well, here in the UK, what you're not allowed to do is to lie and mislead your victims, your suspects. And Jerry makes a very interesting point at the start of the interview by pointing out that in the Brendan Dassey interview, they start off by asking him the most simple, basic of questions. Do you know the difference between right and wrong? You know, and as he points out, you'll never ever find an adult interrogation started off like that. And yet Brendan's confession was regarded as having been given by somebody who was, in their eyes, you know, sort of an adult, when clearly he wasn't. Anyway, as I say, it's when Emily was saying about the fact that, you know, she couldn't remember stuff from 15 years ago, fair enough, but, you know, definitely involved and has got a keen interest in making a murderer. But as I say, I don't necessarily buy that it's from a leaning towards one side or the other. I think it's more a case of representing the what did I call it, the sort of inquiring mind, the inquisitive mind of people who would say, well, you know, they're locked up, they were found guilty, what is there to discuss? And that's what a lot of people felt before Making a Murderer came out, that the whole thing had been signed, sealed and delivered. But now, of course, we're finding out all the shenanigans over there in Manitowoc and Calumet. Interesting that I think my second last conversation with Sheriff Herman, it was just after the original motion was put forward by, was presented by Kathleen Zellner, you know, the big 1,300-page motion. That in itself was funny, because when I phoned Sheriff Herman, I said, look, you know, I've read a post-Crescent report that says that you were unavailable to comment whilst all the other reporters were busy looking through this this motion. I incorrectly said that John Farrak had gone across to the Sheriff's office and wanted to speak to you, and you claimed that you weren't in, or not available. Actually Robert Herman retorted, well, you know, I can choose who I wish to speak to, but that it wasn't John Farrak, it was Alison Durr. So he knew perfectly well that the press were coming, wanted to speak to him, but he didn't want to speak to them, which is fine, that's his choice. But silence can often speak louder than words. But what was really strange, really strange, was when he said, he asked me this question. He asked me, has Kathleen Zellner been given the RAV4? And I said, I don't think so. I said, I believe, although I hadn't seen it yet, because Making a Murderer 2 hadn't come out then, I believe that she has got an identical car. And I said, as far as I've heard, what's very interesting is the fact that as far as her experts are concerned, they have never seen this, and you know, really prosecutors should realise this as well, that if you do not have a mix of blood between the alleged perpetrator and the victim, either in the front or the back, that is a huge red flag, and it is clear evidence of planting. So it was interesting that he asked me that question, and I said no. As far as I know, I don't think she has, and I made inquiries and phoned him back straight away, you know, a few hours later, and say no, she's not been given the RAV4. She does have a RAV4, and this is what's particularly strange about it: the lack of a mixture of blood in the front and the back of the RAV4. Eventually he did stop speaking to me. I kind of wonder if they introduced, basically I think they called her or him a manager to look after Robert Herman, because I think he was possibly saying a bit too much. Anyway, getting back to wrongful convictions. As you know, I've been doing a series of articles looking at the work of Saul Kazan and Richard Leo, Stephen Drizzen, Brian Cutler. And I did mention that I'd got a reply back from Richard Leo, who was the co-author of False Confessions in the Post-DNA World, a look at 125 wrongful conviction cases. So let's just carry on then with, well, first of all, this was the reply that I got from Richard Leo, the email that he sent me. He wrote, "Hi Paul, thanks. Steve and I are working on another article with 250 new proven confession cases, but it will be a long time before that is out." But that's interesting, you know. The previous article was 2004, but if they're working on a new one, great stuff. So I'd asked him about the videotaping, how successful it had been, and he said that he believes, sorry, let me start that sentence again. He wrote, "I believe around 25 or 26 states now have mandatory electronic recording in some or all of their cases, and it has made, or appears to have made, a big difference. I attached some articles that may be of interest. Thanks, Richard." So just quickly go through one of the articles. It's not particularly long. It was a article by the let's get this right. It was in the New York Times. It was August the 1st of last year. The piece is called "Videotape All Police Interrogations. Justice Demands It" by Saul Kazan and David Thompson. He wrote, Dr. Kazan is a professor of excuse me. Dr. Kazan is a professor of psychology. Mr. Thompson is a partner at a firm that specializes in non-confrontational interview techniques. As I say, August the 1st, 2019, so very recent. Ava DuVernay's When They See Us is a docudrama about the 1989 Central Park jogger case in which 5 innocent teenage boys were wrongfully convicted of a brutal assault. In the film, the scene depicting 4 of the young men being badgered into giving false confessions are hard to watch. Yet they do not depict word for word what happened. That was impossible because no video footage exists. In what became known as the Central Park 5 case, detectives held the boys in custody and interrogated them on and off for 14 to 30 hours. It was only after the boys broke down and agreed to confess that an assistant district attorney was called in to record their prepared statements on camera. New York now requires the police to record the entire interrogation for serious crimes, but half the states that have no such requirement, leaving the most critical of police procedures a mystery to prosecutors, judges, jurors, and the public alike. Justice requires that all police interrogations, the entire process, not just the final confession, should be recorded on video. The two of us who write this article agreed on this point, despite coming from very different professional perspectives. I say we've got Saul Kazan and the guy who's a partner in a non-confrontational interrogation firm. One of us is a partner in a company that trains law enforcement officers and investigators in how to conduct interviews and interrogations. The other, Saul Kazan, is a so-called psychologist who studies the causes of false confessions and the role they play in wrongful convictions. We both know that confessions can be vital to policing and intelligence gathering. Let me just close that down just a wee bit. Relative to other forms of evidence, they are considered the gold standard, but they are also fallible. Today, 28% of DNA exonerations involve false confessions. This number could be drastically reduced if all interrogations were recorded. Some of the resistance in the law enforcement community to a recording requirement is pragmatic. For example, what would happen if officers failed to record an interrogation because of equipment malfunction? Some of it is also based on strategic concerns, like the fear that recording would inhibit investigators, that suspects knowing they are on camera would refuse to speak, much less incriminate themselves, and that judges and jurors might not like the tactics they would see used in these tapes. Well, I don't think anybody in Manitowoc had any problem with the tactics used in Brendan's case. So anyway, for many years now, police agencies have been videotaping confessions after the suspect had been interrogated. Beginning in 1975, the Bronx County District Attorney, Mario Merola, initiated a program to do just that. After officers convinced a suspect to confess, they would take him to the DA's office for an on-camera confession. Compared to the lifeless recitation of written statements reread in court, the theatrics were riveting. The effect was potent. In 1983, Mr. Merola was quoted in the New York Times as saying, "We get a conviction in virtually every case." The practice of videotaping confessions was adopted in short order throughout New York. city, in Chicago and elsewhere in the country. Then the landscape changed. In New York in 1982, attorneys Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck founded the Innocence Project, a non-profit organisation that used new DNA technology to examine prisoners' claims of innocence. As the DNA exonerations started to pour in, a number that is now up to 374 and counting, they revealed that over 28% had involved a false confession. Now get this, in the subset of homicide cases, that percentage was doubled. At about the same time, scientific research on false confessions started to identify vulnerable suspect populations like teenagers and adults with intellectual disabilities and mental health issues. Psychologically coercive tactics like lying about evidence and implying leniency upon confession, that's very relevant, of course, to Brendan, and other risk factors like the fact that innocent people almost never lawyer up. And in brackets they put, why would I? I didn't do anything wrong. And of course we know that Travis would be shouting, he must get a lawyer, as he once pointed out. If ever there's an issue with a police being investigated by the police having done something wrong, the first thing they do is get a lawyer. If it's okay for the police to do that, then really the general public should do the same. The problem is not just that innocent people can be broken into capitulation. It's that their narratives are often too compelling to disbelieve. When law professor Brandon Garrett analysed 66 false confessions, he unearthed this startling fact. Most contained details about the crime that were spot-on accurate, often vividly so, and yet not known to the public. The confessors were all innocent. They didn't know firsthand what happened. Whether purposeful or inadvertent, the detectives in these cases had communicated the facts during the interrogation, a process known as contamination. A retired Washington, D.C. detective, James Trainum, knows all too well how this can happen. In an article entitled, "I Took a False Confession, so don't tell me it doesn't happen," Trainum reflected on a case in which a suspect who confessed to him was later exonerated. Years later, during a review of the videotapes, he noted that he and his colleagues had, quote, discovered our mistake. He explained, "We showed the suspect our evidence and unintentionally fed her details that she was able to parrot back to us at a later time. It was a classic false confession case, and without the video, we would never have known." Inspired by these developments, many professional organisations, like the International Association of Chiefs of Police, have called for the video recording of custodial interrogations. 25 states, the District of Columbia, and all federal law enforcement agencies also went on to adopt the practice for some or all felonies. Every agency should demand the recording of all suspect interviews and interrogations without exception. As reported in the American Criminal Law Review, Tom Sullivan, a former United States attorney and partner at Jenner and Block in Chicago, interviewed hundreds of officers in police and sheriff's departments that had begun to record interrogations. Almost to a person, these officers became enthusiastic supporters. Sullivan's respondents cited multiple benefits. Many said that recording allows them to focus on the suspect without taking notes, that they can scour the sessions afterwards for any fabricated, incriminating or inconsistent remarks the suspect made. Well, I would suggest Wiegand and Fassbender should definitely take a look at Mike Holbach on film. And that they spend less time in court having to defend their on-camera confession-taking practices against frivolous claims of coercion. Recording brings two additional benefits. The first is that the mere presence of a camera will dissuade police officers from over-manipulating suspects and encourage instead the kinds of ethical interviewing practices that are starting to reshape modern-day police work. The second benefit is that recording preserves an accurate memorial account of the exchange between the police and suspects. Because Brendan's confession was in 2006, you wonder why it is that, even given the fact that people can see how obviously coerced Brendan was, they just refuse to accept that. And you see just how manipulative Wiegert and Fassbender are. Opponents still argue that recording will distract or inhibit suspects, that some will flat out refuse to talk. That concern is unfounded. In partnership with a northeastern police department, Kassan and colleagues analysed 122 real cases in which the suspects were informed or not that their sessions would be recorded. The result: camera-informed suspects spoke as often, they were as likely to waive their Miranda rights, they were as likely to make admissions, not just denials, and detectives rated them as equally open and cooperative. 1 year later, the two sets of cases were similarly adjudicated. Not a single camera-informed suspect balked. There was simply no evidence to support the claim that the recording inhibits suspects in any way. We've heard it said that recording interrogations always benefits defendants. That is just not true, unless in Brendan's case. Justice benefits. Police officers frivolously accused of coercion benefit. Suspects prodded into false confessions benefit. Prosecutors, judges and jurors, the essential gatekeepers of confessions, benefit. The victims of serial offenders who roam the street because an innocent person confessed to their prior crime benefit. At a time when just about everyone is armed with a portable video camera and false confessions are a known stark reality, there are no excuses. Yet many states fail to implement this remedy. And in some states that do, you could drive a truck through the loopholes that excused the failure to do so. The suspect refused. The equipment was not available. Inadvertence. It is trying to lift the veil of secrecy from the interrogation room so that everyone can see how true and false confessions are produced. It goes on to say that Sol Kassan is a professor of psychology at the John Day College of Criminal Justice, and David Thompson is a partner at Wicklander Zulawski and Associates, a training and consulting firm specialising in non-confrontational interview techniques. As I say, I'd asked him about whether the recording of interrogations had made a difference, and he's saying that it definitely has. It is doing. It's ongoing. So it begs the question then, well, because we've all seen how bad Brendan's confession is, why is he still sat where he is? And with seemingly now, that's the end of his process of appealing based on the coercion of that confession. But we'll keep talking about it, because talking about it might eventually, as Steve Drizin wrote to me, eventually dissenting opinions will end up becoming majority opinions. And maybe at some point in the future they will look at Brendan's case and say, we need to do something about this. As I say, it's here in the UK we don't have the well, let's put it this way. Stephen Drizin was doing one of his presentations in, I believe it was in the West Midlands, possibly Birmingham, and in the audience was a police investigator who interrogates suspects, questions suspects. He pointed out that had he done what Wiegert and Fassbender had done, he would be out of his job. But it makes you ask the question, doesn't it? You know, as I say, why is Brendan where he is? I think it comes right back to what Sean Atwood told us I think it was, well, certainly in his book, and he's told us since, Steve and Brendan have been kidnapped and being held as political prisoners. There's no other way of looking at it. When you look at how badly some of the judges in the en banc hearing, how they have misrepresented stuff. We will get on to, of course, the classic control question that is cited by Judge Hamilton in his majority decision. That's one of the things I will be reading through, is Judge Hamilton's decision, because it is interesting that he quotes the control question and somehow cannot understand the English language. When you consider what was Brendan appealing based on, that his will was overborne. I don't think there's any doubt. Everybody can quite clearly see that his will was overborne. He's so apparently confessed to facts that simply cannot be corroborated. Anyway, I've kept you long enough. It was interesting, in this article, Richard Leo, well, it's not Richard Leo that wrote it, but he mentions this. No, what's the name of the person that he mentions in? Yes, Sullivan. Tom Sullivan. Richard Leo suggested look up Tom Sullivan, this former United States attorney and partner at Jenner and Block in Chicago, because he does a lot of magazines about interrogations and confessions. So yes, I will be checking out some of his, well, I've already started looking at some of Tom Sullivan's articles. Anyway, kept you long enough. Just to say that obviously next Sunday we'll do our third live chat with Magilla 39 and Eric Jose, of course. I'll be there as well. We're hoping, in fact, that the gentleman from Groningen in Netherlands, Roel Griffin, will agree to come and join us, because that'd be great to have him on board as well. So anyway, we'll catch you all soon, and looking forward, of course, to Mamathon, which I believe people are looking at the idea of doing it the weekend before the state has to give its reply, which is now the 27th of March. So anyway, we'll keep you informed about all that's going on. And then say that's all I've got for today. So catch you again soon. Bye for now.